Dear guests, welcome all of you here tonight. I would like to present our lecturer, Professor Dr. Laszlo Boros, medical doctor, retired professor of pediatrics and endocrinology at the University of California, Los Angeles. But before continuing with this, I would like to mention, for the sake of our foreign viewers and listeners, that today is a special day for us Hungarians, because it is exactly the 65th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution against communist and Soviet oppression. And now I would like to continue with the presentation of our speaker today. And I would like to continue with a few scientific metric figures marking Professor Boros's professional career. He is one of the most cited researchers of the world, with a ResearchGate score of 41.53, which is higher than 97.5% of all ResearchGate members. Professor Boros is a member of 5 editorial boards of leading medical journals, including the Nature Group Scientific Reports and Medicine, of which he is an editor. He contributed to 4 medical patents. Professor Boros is a member of 10 major scientific boards, including the Public Service Department of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and several US scientific boards. He has served as a reviewer in 66 different scientific journals worldwide. He holds 11 scientific awards from the United States and Hungary, his native country. He is the author of 97 scientific articles, 11 chapters in medical books, and has so far had a total of 227 scientific talks worldwide. He has won tens of scientific grants for his research projects. At present, he teaches deuteronomics, the science of deuterium or heavy hydrogen, at the Free University of Amsterdam, and is involved in several ongoing medical research projects. These are, however, only figures, and it is not these which makes Professor Boros special. He is special and standouts of the scientific community because of his curiosity, his uncompromising strive for the scientific truth, regardless of what the official scientific truth is, regardless of what is fashionable, widely accepted, profitable, or promoting career advancement. As a close friend, I was lucky to observe Professor Boros's career and listen to his numerous talks in every possible media worldwide. However, rather than becoming bored after all these decades, he surprises me again and again by his independent and original ideas, his courage to go against the mainstream, if his analysis, carried out with the ruthless logic of a true scientist and based on his deep professional knowledge, requires him to do so. In addition, Professor Boros explains even the most complex issues with amazingly simple but relevant models in a way that even people outside of the medical sciences can understand the subject. So get ready for surprises in the next hour when he explains why it is important to deplete heavy hydrogen levels in our body to maintain or restore health. And I'm passing the floor.
Thank you so much, Prof. And it was just very nice of you to get all these numbers and all these statistics about scientific performance or scientific acknowledgements from academic institutions. I just had the passion to do science and teach. But I know, although I'm a medical doctor, I've been mostly involved in teaching and science. And today, what we are going to talk about and what we're going to cover today is practically a new discipline, a new topic in medical science or medical education. That includes also agriculture. And we're going to cover the effect of this heavy hydrogen isotope, which I'm going to talk about in more details. And I also have an announcement to make. My hometown, Törökszentmiklós in Hungary, is 300 years old in the sense that Hungary was repopulated after the Turks left Hungary 300 years ago. So this is a big year for my little hometown of about 25,000 people. Usually I just acknowledge this. This is where I grew up practically, and this is where I finished my high school before I went to college. Thank you very much. anyhow, so we're going to talk about this heavy hydrogen. It's very important simply because now it seems that this is going to be part of medical education at the Vrije University in Amsterdam. And as it seems, other academic institutions are also joining these courses. And it's actually about this heavy hydrogen or deuterium. That's why the topic or the lectures are called Biogenomics, as Kathleen pointed this out. And it is quite interesting and amazing in the sense that by dietary approach and by watching your lifestyle, you can actually improve many disease conditions, including chronic diabetes-related metabolic symptoms or syndromes like obesity, and also you can improve infectious diseases and also some other cardiovascular events, which we now have quite broad experience working with physicians and colleagues. So before I would go into details, let's look at, we need to kind of go through the little movies that I have just to see where this biochemical process takes place. And that's practically where we produce water in our body. Because we do produce water in our body. This is why we consume oxygen from air. And this is why we eat food. We only use the hydrogen or the proton from food and the oxygen from air to make this water called metabolic water. And for that, we need to step into the cells, into our cells. And I think it starts like this. This is the mitochondria. Mitochondria is practically our power plant in our cells and kind of the water producing unit. And in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, you can see various proteins, and one of them is actually a spinning protein. It spins around, and the hydrogen from food is passed outside of the inner membrane, and it's in the intermembrane space. And as you can see, these hydrogens that come from food, they attach to this protein, and as they move the rotating part of the protein along, as they go around, a proton will be freed and falls into the mitochondrial matrix. So practically these are motors, these are nanomotors. This is how we call them. And as they rotate these proteins, this is how we produce these energy substrates or energy molecules called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. And as you can see here, as the protein moves around, more and more ATP is produced, and this hydrogen comes from food. And what happens to the proton or the hydrogen that falls in the matrix, it binds to oxygen and water is formed. So practically, for the system to operate, you have to have oxygen and hydrogen from food that powers these nanomotors. However, hydrogen has a heavy isotope brother, which is also present in food. And if a heavy isotope attaches to this nanomotor at this rotation, it breaks it. So practically our mitochondria, our cells that are producing energy for us, cannot handle this twice as heavy, twice as large isotope of hydrogen, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail. But practically they break these nanomotors, these heavy hydrogen isotopes, or deuterium. Now, if you think back high school physics or chemistry class, this is the periodic table about the elements that form our body, but primarily hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen and nitrogen are the most common elements. Obviously, we have some chlorides, we have some sulfur and some phosphates in our body, and some trace elements, but practically the most common and the most abundant atom that we have in our body by volume, not by weight, but by volume, is hydrogen. Hydrogen is the first atom or the first element of the periodic table. It only has a proton. And this proton makes it one dot and heavy. And this proton powers these nanomotors that what I showed you, those little white dots that were spinning with this nanomotor are this proton. And as we go and build our body, we use also carbon and oxygen mostly, but hydrogen is carried either on carbon and oxygen. Oxygen and hydrogen makes water. Carbon and hydrogen makes fatty acids and sugars and so on, which we're going to talk about in more detail. So practically life is nothing else but the dance of this hydrogen between carbon and oxygen, depending on what cell organelle or what biochemical process we look at. That's practically what the fate of the hydrogen is, to power these nanomotors and to sustain and to promote life. So this is a sum of what I have shown you on the video. This is the interior part of the mitochondria. This is where metabolic water is produced. This is about 2,000 gallons a day or 7.2 cubic meters a day. So it's almost like a swimming pool amount of protons and water that is recycled in our body every day. Why this so much? We're going to do a few calculations, but these are these nanomotors that I showed you, the ATP synthase, which actually handles these protons or hydrogen that come into the mitochondrial matrix, and water is formed. And in the meantime, the citric acid cycle or the Krebs-Engeldy cycle, which you probably heard in school, is delivering the hydrogen for the system. And one of these enzymes or one of these reactions, fumaric acid, is why Albert Engeldy got the Nobel Prize in 1937. My grandparents knew him in person because he was working in Szeged. But this particular topic is so dear to me simply because this takes us back to old time Hungary about 100 years ago, when all these discoveries and all this research were made. They did not know deuterium yet because it was discovered somewhat later in the 1930s. So Engeldy has described many of the reactions that are involved in the Krebs-Engeldy cycle, but he did not know the effect of deuterium on these nanomotors. Now we do. So we can extend and we can take his research further as far as medicine and agriculture is concerned. Now, the reason why I'm showing here a sports car, which is a Corvette C5, it's an American sports car. I had owned one of these, a red one, a cherry red one, for California, of course. And it had a beautiful ride. And as you can tell, the speed and the meter that measures the car's rotation per minute as far as the engine rotations go, as a sports car, they can go up to like 9,000, 10,000. And actually, this is where our nanomotors are spinning. So our nanomotors are actually sports cars, or even faster than sports cars. The fastest nanomotor that they measured so far, they measured it in bacteria, and it was 45,000 rotations per minute. So you can imagine your car does what, 3,000, 4,000 rotations per minute, depending on how fast you drive. But if I drive 120 kilometers per hour on the Belgian freeways, it is probably around 2,500, 3,000 rotations per minute. Our nanomotors in the mitochondria spin around 9,000 rotations per minute, which is very fast. So you can imagine if the heavy hydrogen isotope hits this nanomotor, what happens to it? It's really a devastating process. And this is why health is so important with regard of how much deuterium we consume in the diet. Now, how efficient this approach to deuterium depletion is, and through ketosis or ketogenic diet or eating fat, is I'm gonna show you this case, which appeared in a Hungarian naturopathic magazine. This little guy, his name is Mate. He is the subject of this study because what happened with him is that they used the naturopathic medicine approach as a therapeutic applications, and the Guardian, for example, which are leading newspapers formulating opinions about diets, now they actually have more and more articles about how important is eating fat or eating ketogenic diets, simply because of the low nutrient content. We're going to cover this a little bit more details, but practically why fat-based food is so important. This is a current topic and current discussion in the medical literature, and this is actually part of the RIA university course. Both natural and clinical medical practices in Hungary describe interesting cases in pediatrics, and this is what we're going to cover in the Naturopathic Medicine Journal as it was published. This is a case study from 2019, and Mati was 6 years old at that time, and he had abdominal pain and vomiting. And but the doctors they gave him steroids. In 2016, the study appeared in 2019, but the misery started in 2016. That's when Mate got sick, and the possible diagnosis included chronic appendicitis, bowel problem, or food allergy. Usually, when doctors don't know what's the problem, they give them all kinds of names. So this was the case in his scenario. So after the steroid treatments, here you can see his chubby stature, and you can see the redness of his legs. You can see the redness and the swelling of his joints, and you can see his arms also, and then his hands also. So practically he was a very sick child at that point. Doctors were treating him with steroids without any success. Quitting gluten, so they recommended quitting dairy products, gluten, and other allergens. They also treated him continuously with steroids, and in April 1st, 2017, when he woke up, he couldn't get out of bed. So practically his pain was so advanced that he couldn't get out of bed, and his joints were swollen and his fingers were swollen. So practically they diagnosed him with a juvenile multi-joint inflammation. Again, that's practically just a descriptive name of a disease that they did not really know what was wrong with him. And they recommended immunosuppressive medications. They found Baker's cyst, and in April 2018, doctors recommended biological therapy, which the parents said, no, thank you very much. This kid is only 8 years old. We've been through enough. We're not going to do chemotherapy. We're not going to do immunosuppressive therapy. This is just too much for a young kid. We're going to look somewhere else. And in the second half of 2018, the patient started to follow an actual ketogenic diet. This is what we have. Thank you, Katalin, to make this beautiful dinner.
And Adrian.
And Adrian, thank you very much. And every one of you who contributed. But that's practically the bacon, the fatty meat stuff that we have is part of this ketogenic diet, which Mati started to consume. And this diet is therapeutic. They call it natural ketogenic diet. That's practically the medical name that we use now. And this is how we're going to teach this at Bio University, how to apply this type of dieting or dietary approach. And the therapeutic effect of this diet is because of this low deuterium. So the nanomotors are intact and spared in this patient. And anyone who consumes this diet, now this is how it usually looks like, this diet. This is a T-bone steak of a cow with big pieces of butter on it. This is a broth or bone marrow soup with egg yolk in it. And this is practically eggs and bacon and pork cracklings and some Hungarian salami and sausage. So practically this is what our ancestors ate like 100 years ago or a few hundred years ago. This is very standard and very usual Hungarian diet, but I would assume old times all European nations or everywhere in the world, they were consuming animal and plant products that they found in their neighborhoods, and there was no food industry for that matter. But anyhow, these are actually natural ketogenic food sources: fatty meat, bone marrow soup, and a variety of meat products. There are cookbooks that are now available, and you can actually find very good recipes. Katalin just needs some ketogenic desserts.
Yes.
So we're gonna try those after the talk. So this is how Martin looks nowadays. He's playing soccer and he eats this ketogenic diet. You can see his fingers are much improved. You can see his joints are not swollen anymore. And you can see his muscles and his legs are not discolored and not red, not inflamed. Now, the sad part of this is that the pediatrician who was going to put him on chemotherapy sued the family of creating medical treatment. And they wanted to go to Children's Services to take the child away from the parents because actually they cured this kid of the disease, which the doctors and the pharmaceutical industry could have made money on. But after all the legal procedures, the Children's Services said, no, the kid will stay with the family. They have to show various medical exams and results. Practically, the kid was without disease, but this is how bad it is nowadays. If you treat somebody out of the medical context with therapies that actually work, it's almost illegal to do. They almost had to fight this all the way through legally, but they were lucky because the family could keep the kid simply because he had no symptoms and he had no disease. But this is the doctor's mentality. So I'm showing this case simply because I think it's a good learning for everybody who has children or have some kind of disease condition, how to deal with it. I don't go to doctors, not that I'm a doctor, because I just really don't follow standard medical procedures simply because I actually try to avoid them because they are not really helpful. I would rather stick with ketogenic diets and routine depletion. So this is how they look like with their kid, with his sister, and these are the doggies now, but Mate is fine. And this is all because of what he ate. It's not the treatments that he got, it's not the medications, it's not the doctor's advice. It was actually doctors, but these doctors are naturopathic doctors, or they are standard doctors who provide standard care, but they also open to dietary and naturopathic ideas. And here you can see the bacon, you can see this is avocado. Avocado is actually very good because it has high fat content and low deuterium, is heavy isotope. And there's some greens here with a good fatty steak, T-bone steak, you know, like neck meat, and the back of the cow has enough fat. So practically this is the type of food that under ketogenic diet, anybody would consume. Now, let's cover this water situation, because usually doctors recommend drinking 2-3 liters of water a day, which is totally senseless, because actually our body produces water. It's called metabolic water. They call it metabolic water because we produce this through metabolism during metabolic processes. In 1941, the papers appeared in Nature. In 2042, in July, and the paper was written by Dr. Malmby, and you can see here from the abstract is if you consume 100-gram fats, you can produce 110 grams of water. So practically, if you eat a kilogram fat, you produce 1.1 kilogram water from it. So it's more than a liter of water. This is why our grandparents who went to work in the yard or went to work in the field, they didn't take much water with them, even though they were harvesting the whole day. Why? Because they ate water. They actually took bacon with them. And as they were eating the bacon produced just enough water from them from inside to kind of water or supply water for their system or their bodies, their muscles, their muscle work. In contrast to 100 grams, if you eat 100 grams of carbohydrates, you're only going to produce half of that much water. So it's not enough. If you eat sugar or carbohydrate, it does not produce water in your body, but fat does. And why? We're going to clarify by the end of this talk why there's such difference between fat and water, fat and carbohydrates as far as water production. Now, the one common fact about these animals, they live in the desert, that none of them consume water. So you would think of why there's 95% of our species on this planet, especially in the desert, they don't consume water. Even when water is available, they still don't drink it. Because as long as there's enough food around, these animals, they all produce their own water. This is a camel, we all know this. This is a Gila monster. They live in Arizona. I saw them a few times when I lived in Arizona. They are actually deadly lizards. They actually, if they bite you, you die of a hypoglycemic coma. They have a toxin in their saliva. It's called insulin-like growth factor. We actually work with an Italian team, Dr. Perfatti, and we studied the poison of this animal to actually use it as a diabetes drug. And this is a diamondback rattlesnake. The common of all these animals, and I could list hundreds of thousands more, is that none of them drink water. They can't even drink water because they cannot generate vacuum in their mouth. So practically, they are actually these animals, the camels, they go to the oasis not to drink, but to eat. So they don't really need to drink water. I just had a circus in Hungary who had 2 camels next to the Tesco parking lot. The circus was actually just entertaining. They used these camels to entertain. And sure enough, they had a water bucket, but they never touched it. The whole day, the elephant was drinking like crazy. They also had an elephant, but not the camels. So practically, as long as they have food, they don't need water. They have to have the bucket there because that's what the regulation is, even though the common camel doesn't need water. So practically, an interesting phenomenon is that 95% of all species on this planet don't drink water. They just actually produce their own water from inside. How much a week we're gonna calculate it in a minute. So carbohydrates versus hydrocarbons, or carbohydrates versus fat, or sugars versus fatty food. This is what this is. Carbohydrates, various fats, we call them hydrocarbons because of their structure, as a source of water and body fuels. This is very important because this is how we know surely how our body is going to function depending on how much carbohydrates and how much fat we eat. And the advantage of the fat or the various fat types is that practically they have no or very little compared to carbohydrates, this heavy isotope of hydrogen that will break those nanomolecules. So that's another advantage in eating fat or using the ketogenic diet. This is going to be a little bit of chemistry. This is a glucose molecule. You can see C6H12O6. You can see here the structure of the carbon or carbohydrate or table sugar for that matter, or glucose for that matter. There are 6 carbons, the black ones. There are 6 oxygens, the red ones, and 12 hydrogens. Those are the white ones. Please remember, your mitochondria only needs the hydrogen to power those nanomotors, these little white dots. Our mitochondria are going to get rid of the CO2, the carbon, as in the form of carbon dioxide. So this is the source of carbon dioxide, and the hydrogen is going to be used for water production in the mitochondria, as I showed you. The rapid and continuous two-way transport of hydrogens or protons between carbon and oxygen, which I showed you when the periodic table was up, by producing water is the major role of the Albert-Sandurdi cycle. So practically our Krebs-Sandurdi cycle is there to produce and recycle water. We are actually water plant. We are actually power plants almost in that sense, because we produce about 7 cubic meters of water a day, and we also recycle it. So this is what the cycle does. The Krebs-Sandurdi cycle does. Produces and recycles water. He is Mr. Albert-Sandurdi. He was probably one of the most influential biochemists in medical history, simply because he received the Nobel Prize in 1937 without sharing it with anyone, simply because of his discoveries were so significant back then. He's one of the reasons why he received the Nobel Prizes in the TC cycle or in the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria is an enzyme reaction called fumarate hydratase. And what this fumarate hydratase does is, you see this water molecule here, it actually recycles this in our cells and produces malic acid. That's why the apple that's the kind of acid the apple produces, and malic acid helps the cycle to turn around. So practically it's a water recycling system, and it was part of his Nobel Prize. Hydrogen as the fuel of life, that's what he said. That's what he said. He said hydrogen fuels life, and he wrote a book about the living state of the matter. And actually, he describes in detail how hydrogen participates in various biochemical production. And our bodies are the vehicles of the soul, and it does not work without hydrogen or with deuterium instead of hydrogen. So deuterium, he didn't know about it, now we do. So as long as our body works with hydrogen, it really cannot handle deuterium because of its size and because of its weight. So don't pay attention to details. This is the Krebs cycle or the Sandurdi cycle. This is a biochemical chain of reactions in our mitochondria. And if you can count these red dots or red arrows in the cycle itself, it has 9 reactions, and 4 of them actually does nothing else but recycles water. So practically, this is a water absorbing cycle in our body. And if this water has heavy hydrogen or deuterium, it will break down those nanomotors. The biochemical production of carbohydrates and fatty acids are very different. And this difference results in the difference in deuterium content between hydrogen, sugar, carbohydrates, sugars, and fatty acids. And the rest of our biochemical reactions just practically to control the deuterium that gets into our system. So practically our biochemical reactions are there to get rid of deuterium as much as possible. So you will never get into the nanomotors, never get into the mitochondria. And deuterium was discovered by Dr. Harold Clayton Urey. He was an American physicist, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1934 for discovering deuterium. And Sanjay Diabra got his Nobel Prize in 1937 for the biochemical reactions, but at that time, they did not know how or what the role of deuterium in biochemical reactions, but these were actually discovered around the same time, but now we could put the picture together. This is what the Vrij University in Amsterdam will teach in our course. This is what we're gonna explore in more details. Here you can see the isotopes of hydrogen. There's a proton, that's hydrogen, with an electron circling around it. Deuterium has a proton and a neutron, which is the same size and weight as the proton. So you can imagine this guy is being twice as heavy and twice as large, so it wouldn't fit into a nanomotor. And there is this is a stable isotope of hydrogen, and there's a radiating isotope of hydrogen called tritium. It's very low in nature, so we don't usually use this in biochemical presentations or arguments, because this is actually negligible. But actually there is a radiating hydrogen isotope with about a half-life of several thousand years. But practically our biochemical systems play ping pong with these two isotopes of hydrogen. So if your biological system is playing ping pong, then it's using protons. If deuterium gets into the system, it's like playing ping pong with a golf ball. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to go too well. So practically, these two isotopes are the most important of hydrogen. Here you can see the water that can form from protons and deuterium. Water has an oxygen and two hydrogens. If one of the hydrogens is replaced with the heavy deuterium isotope, then we call it semi-heavy water. And if both hydrogens and oxygen are replaced with this heavy deuterium isotope, then we call it heavy water. And you probably remember from your history studies, the heavy water, they used it in Germany to generate atomic reactions to control the Americans bombed the facility of heavy water supply facility in Northern Europe, simply because the difference between these two isotopes is so large that with heavy water, you can slow down neutrons in a nuclear power plant. So these are very different water molecules, depending on how many deuterium occupies the oxygen. So practically what we call it replacing hydrogen with deuterium will dramatically change the feature of water, and that's the same in our system as well. So these are chemical bonds between carbon and hydrogen, nitrogen and hydrogen, oxygen and hydrogen. If we replace hydrogen with deuterium, then it's going to affect the chemical bond, and it's the breakage of this chemical bond will be 7 times, 8.5 times, and 10 times slower if it's replaced by deuterium. That's significant. That's a significant change in reaction kinetics. So in biological systems, for example, if this is a DNA molecule, then if you replace, or RNA molecule, if you replace a hydrogen with deuterium, it's going to be much more stable. And this is a pharmaceutical approach to produce various pharmaceutical compounds. The amount of deuterium in our environment is what we call 150 parts per million. That means every million hydrogen would have 150 parts per million or 150 deuterium. And it's about 0.015%. It's not a whole lot. But when we multiply the isotope effect with the concentration, we're gonna come up with some shocking numbers, because practically we have to multiply it when it comes to certain features of hydrogen, the concentration of deuterium by 1,000. So this is actually a very influential isotope. Deuterium is also the highest in concentration of all inorganic components of our blood. It's about 12 to 14 millimole per liter. If you look at calcium, magnesium, kalium, potassium, and glucose, they are all in the range of 2, 3 millimole per liter. So we have a whole lot more deuterium in our system than we would think of. And this is what happens with a biological system when it encounters a deuterium. It just, those enzymes, those weightlifting working proteins, they just can't lift it. So practically they break down and end up the game. And this is what practically a very damaging effect of deuterium is, practically behaves like a bull in the China store, or like an elephant in a China store. It breaks proteins and it breaks down cellular systems. So this is our course at the Brown University, via Universitat, Introduction to Submolecular Medical Sciences. This is the course that you can take now to learn about deuterium, deuteronomics. You can apply for the course, and it's part of your credit system. So you can earn credits, educational credits for studying, for signing up for this course. And there's also one for agricultural sciences. Why? Because actually deuterium comes from food. So agricultural engineers, they need to be aware of that. So this is why we teach this to medical students and also the agricultural students. So it's a very important topic now. We can actually use this therapeutically with colleagues. There are some very important medical advances around deuterium, or limiting deuterium concentrations in food, and this is what ketogenic diet does. This is what Eskimo kitchen does. This is what our ancestors did. They supply low deuterium ketogenic diets, which actually preserve these nanometers, and our body is functioning much more of a physiological manner. You can read in details. I'm not going to read this at this point. You can read in details what the course covers, and you can actually use this. It's a 4 credit point class in college. So it adds a significant, I would say, in the semester, we start teaching this in the winter semester, and we can actually add significant number of credits towards education and for that matter. And this is also available for not only medical students, but also for doctors, and also for engineers, and also for agricultural food producers who ever want to learn more about this. And we are trying to turn this into part of continuing medical education. So practically that's what I wanted to cover tonight. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to answer. Please.
I have a question. So at the beginning, you were explaining that I don't know,
mitochondria.
This cell, I call it a cell to make it easy. It's like a nanomotor, and you were showing some movements and how it turns. Do you know this? Because this has been observed under the microscope.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it looks very nice, this animation, but that's actually how it happens. And do you know that it happens like that? Because scientists have seen this happening.
Actually, the scientist who first saw this and described it, he got the Nobel Prize in chemistry, in medicine and physiology in 1987.
So this
1988.
is a
So
process.
this is already a Nobel Prize award.
But these are processes which have been observed, which really
Yes.
happened. It's not a
Yes.
hypothesis, it has been seen.
Yes,
So you can actually see it under the microscope, or you made an indirect conclusion. I mean, you look at the output and then you make a logical conclusion of how this could have happened. Is
So
it your question?
you can see the nanomotor under the microscope.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
It's better to see it under an electron microscope, which is actually, this is a small, it's a very small protein. It's only 5 nanometers across. But one of my colleagues in Szeged, he measures the rotation of these nanomotors as they switch the positive charged proton and drop it into, because then you see a change in voltage or change in current on both sides of the membrane. So with an oscilloscope, you can actually see how fast these nanomotors are spinning, rotating. And besides that, you can apply drugs, and you can apply, for example, music to the system. And even music will change the rotation of these nanomotors because vibration interacts with the membranes and so on. And also light, sunlight, interacts with these nanomotors.
Would this then, for example, be something where you could also wonder whether electromagnetic waves could have an impact? I'm mentioning this because of all the things that were said about 5G. The
electromagnetic waves definitely alter the rotations of these nanomotors. It's not only deuterium, it's electromagnetic waves, it's food and deuterium, and it's also sunlight. So there's a number of interferences that actually regulate the rotation. So when it comes to EM, electromagnetic field damage, that usually because of these magnetic fields are modified by these electromagnetic fields and they slow down these nanomotors. So they can break it.
Wow.
That's right.
One question related to that question. And under this microscope, they can see actually the deuterium as well, not only the hydrogen, but the deuterium, they can see.
They can see how it slows down.
But the deuterium themselves, they cannot.
The deuterium is too small to see it. You have to be at least 5 angstrom. It is actually less than a nanometer. So usually how it works, when protons or deuterons get close to each other, about 5 angstrom, which is probably in the range of their size, then you see them acting very different. And this is what we are actually looking at Prague University with the magnetic resonance department and so on, because we measure food deuterium content and we predict the effect of certain food items on these nanomotors.
And another question, if no one else has a question. I know from your previous lectures that deuterium, like God designed the world and people in a way that the environment and people's bodies are low in deuterium, but then obviously it increased. And why did it increase?
It's the food industry. It's GMO. Right? So if you raw chips, like the potato chips that you can buy in the food store, the natural abundance of deuterium is 155 ppm in nature. What I showed you, actually in that chips is about 175 ppm. So it's actually increased even compared to the highest spectrum level. And we used to have 120, 113, between 113 and 120 ppm, and now we are in the 155 ppm range. Natural waters are low in deuterium simply because of precipitation. But water that you get in the bottled water, the water that they produce for you and they recommend doing 2-3 liters, those are actually 145, 150 ppm. So those are really not the deuterium degree of water that you should be producing. And if you want to drink water, I would recommend only drink water when you are thirsty, only drink water as much as you need, and drink deuterium degree of water. Because it's like good rainwater. but we don't have rainwater anymore. We can buy depleted water.
Excuse me. So you're saying that we're speaking about natural waters like lakes and rivers and oceans. And is it true that the deuterium content of these natural waters, have they increased over time? They used to be lower in prehistoric times and they have been increasing continuously, or how is
The
it?
water's deuterium content did not increase. The vapor deuterium content increased because of the global change in climate. It's not, I don't call it global warming because people don't really have anything to do with this.
Yes.
It's the Earth's spinning characteristics and spinning behavior differs around the sun. Every 25,000 to 40,000 years we have an ice ages, and the Earth is farther away from the sun. It has different positions because of these natural geographic or planetary movements. We are experiencing higher and lower between the vapor, because water is the oceans. 2/3 of the Earth's surface is oceans, and about 5 times there's more oceans inside the Earth core. That's how we call it. And practically based on the temperatures of the sun energy as it falls in, they actually boil, or vapor has higher energy as it produces, so more deuterium gets out from water, moves over the land, waters the crop, and that's why we have more deuterium in food. Now, this would not be a problem. This would not be that dramatic of a problem if there was no agriculture industry in GMO. Because GMO is nothing else, just practically knock out the deuterium enzymes in the plants so the plants will grow. Because deuterium make things grow. It doesn't make things rotate, but it makes things grow. This is how bacteria propagate themselves. This is how bacteria grow. They ferment sugar, which has high deuterium, and this is how they obtain their deuterium for growth, continued growth. And that's practically what GMO is. Well, in principle. So practically it's the combination of climate change or natural changes or periodic changes in climate and the agriculture industry. They use GMO, knock out plants to grow faster, bigger crops, more food, but it's not quality food. It's practically doing all that stuff. And this is why we have so many population disease epidemics nowadays. And that includes obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, all kinds of psychiatrical problems, cancer, unfortunately, and cardiovascular events. So these are all related to the food that you saw this little kid's case, and I could list hundreds of those. When they put them on Degenerative Diet, Ketogenic Diet, their disease condition improved.
Do you have any more questions? Because if not, I would like to ask 2 more questions, but only.
Can I have a question?
Please go ahead.
No, first you.
All right. So most people's objections to this fat-based diet is that we have always heard that you have to have all these minerals and vitamins that are contained in vegetables and fruits. And now you're saying that we have to eat animal fat. And nobody has ever told us before that fat contains, okay, they said it contains, if not vitamins, then at least these, ferrum and all this stuff. But apparently fat contains vitamin. Can you tell more about it?
Yeah, well, you know, there are vitamins that are fat soluble. A, D, A, E, K vitamins. There are 4 vitamins that are purely fat soluble. You can only get them from fat or from plants with high fat content. And also the animal or the pork that you're eating and the fat of the pork, you actually eat all the minerals and all the vitamins that the pork already ate because they ate plants. So all the vitamins that the animals consume, you now consume eating their products. And if you eat liver, if you eat interiors, that's what I love liver, I love interiors, I love, sausages, I love stuff from animals, especially interiors. And those all have very significant amounts of vitamins. And there are two requirements. The animal has to be eating its natural food. And animals have to eat what they season, what they eat in the season. And I'll give you a good example. There are two ways of eating cow around. The farming industry, they grain feed the cows. That's made of corn. Corn is actually sugar. Cow would never eat corn. They eat grass. If you compare biochemically the cow that eats corn in an industrial setting, in a farm-based environment, or they are actually grass-fed, or they are out in the pasture and they just eat the grass, those animals have very different health conditions. And the best way you can tell is that the food industry is very proud of the fact that none of the cow meat is more than 4 years old, for that matter, 5 years. Usually in the farm industry, they butcher the cow at the age of 4 and 5. Why? Because they don't live any longer. They are dying. They are desperately sick animals.
They are sick.
They are actually, they can't even get up. And I do have friends who actually have natural grass-fed, pasture-raised cows. And here's the comparison. One of my friends who in Hungary, his name is Degenerative, he grass feeds all his cows, the Hungarian gray cow. They don't really do well on industrial settings. The oldest cow he had was 36 years old and he had 16 offspring. So they had 16 little calf they raised, and the cow died when she was 36 years old. If you do this with the industrial cow, they only live for 5 years and they only have 4 cows. So it's a dramatic difference when you look at cows that are grass-fed or cows that are industrially kind of fed. They feed them GMO stuff, soy. In the US, they use protein supplements that are made of jellyfish. When would a cow eat jellyfish? Never. But they feed them with this because it's a protein supplement. But the cow would never eat it. So of course it was.
And the pork, the pigs, what should they eat to be considered to be naturally raised?
Yeah, the pork, they pretty much eat grass and nuts and mushrooms and, what is around in the, around the establishment in nature. They eat fruits, but only season.
I mean,
Roots and mushrooms and, how do they call this mushroom that is underground and only the pig can find it? And it's
Truffle.
Truffle. That's what they dig up their stuff. They dig their food. And you wanted to ask a question?
I would like to ask a question. If someone had a stroke and got well after that, quite soon, 2 weeks after that, and was able to, walk and etc. And then has problems. I'm asking because one of my friends has a very close friend who has this problem. And this person had it 10 years ago, a stroke, and now, and he got quite well, but now it's becoming that this part, this one part of the body is aching more and more. And I just would like to know what could help, and if this ketogenic diet could help, and what else might help in terms of, you know, making it less, you know, because this person apparently also is starting to have problems walking.
Sure.
You know, that the pain is becoming more and more.
How old is this person? I'm just curious.
I'm not sure. I think around close to his 70s.
70s?
Close.
Young,
yeah.
Not that old.
Yeah, not that old, actually.
Listen, I don't advise patients directly, but doctors do. In my experiences, based on their experiences, once they put the patient on a ketogenic ketone-depleted diet with ketone-depleted water, their medical conditions improve dramatically. Adrian, you want to share your father's experience?
Yes, my father had a stroke 6 years ago, and he was completely paralyzed, you know, the whole body. But after 6 months, he was okay. And he started this diet in January.
They ketone-depleted here. So so for the record, now we are talking about a patient who had a stroke and went on a ketogenic diet.
Yes, after 3 months, he felt much more better. And after 6 months, he started to feel the whole body.
So his sensory functions came back.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
thank you so much.
Besides the motor functions, then the sensory functions were also returned based on this ketogenic Eskimo kitchen, is that one of our colleagues in Hungary, Dr. Csaba told. They started this great therapeutic approach to this. And there are many others, Peter Voss. There are doctors who work in this scenario arena, and they could actually give you very good kind of feedback on how or what to expect medically. And that comes, just 1 second. You want to ask the question?
I was thinking about, you mentioned that 120 years ago people ate like this, that's correct. But they also move much more during the day, so they not been sitting. So how does this fit together with this kind of
Well, you can imagine how much better this diet is if they could even perform heavy physical work without.
So would you recommend that if you eat like things that you move more? So
yeah. It's a lifestyle. This is what I was saying in the beginning. It's food, what you drink, that's part of food, and also your lifestyle. So you kind of do some kind of a physical exercise. It doesn't have to be physical work, but if it is, this diet is just as good as anything else. Well, it's better than anything else. And you can actually kind of almost like you can actually feed your body weight. You can kind of decide how you want it. It's really interesting because even I started loading to a ketogenic diet about 8 years ago, just like in a serious man. My identical twin, unfortunately, his name was Ferenc. He died in 2006 of esophageal cancer. And in 2011, they found a tumor in my chest on the right side before a surgery. They wanted to send me to an oncologist. And I said, I'm not going to an oncologist because I don't care. I don't talk to oncologists. And I don't care about standard medical treatment. So, and that was like 10 years ago. I don't care. Because I know as long as I consume this type of diet and I'm ketone depleted, I may have diseases, but they really cannot take on simply because there's not sufficient deuterium for cell propagations, for cell proliferations, and so on. And it's the general kind of feedback that we get from physicians who really are able to put patients on deuterium ketogenic diets, and they can also kind of comply or they keep on these diets. They're actually very efficient in treating various medical conditions. I think in Dr. Csaba, well, there are medical papers and publications about these topics, and Dr. Csaba told they published with his colleague Dr. Zsófia Penance, they published a paper about a brain cancer patient who was a Catholic priest. And he went on standard treatments, metastases, and he was going down pretty fast. So the clergy actually fired him because they thought maybe he has 3 months to live. That's all. So they replaced he was actually removed from his priesthood, and they put him on this ketogenic diet, and this was 4 years ago. Now he's back in church and he's preaching. So it is really very critical and important as far as medical information goes. And this is, as case reports, these are the ones that we're going to teach at the University, because doctors and students, we have to start with students and we have to build up from them. And kind of integrate this knowledge with standard medical care. I'm not saying standard medical care is bad, even though I don't care much about it. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's simply just, I don't think it's that effective. Just leave it. And you wanted to ask?
I wanted to ask about neurodegenerative diseases. I'm thinking specifically about Parkinson. My brother has Parkinson. He's younger than me, and he's actually a very healthy guy. So, and I always thought it was something for old people, but apparently it's a disease which I think is more and more common, and actually starts pretty young. I wasn't aware of that before that happened. So I was wondering if such a ketogenic diet could do something for that kind of diseases.
Yeah, so here the natural ketogenic diet is very important because Parkinson's disease now, and I know this from Dr. Stephanie Sepp, who's an MIT investigator, and she worked a lot with glyphosate. Glyphosate is the food industry or the agriculture industry's pesticide, or herbicide. Practically they use it in every crop. They knock out genes, so these plants are resistant to glyphosate, but the weed is not, so they actually spray everywhere this glyphosate. Glyphosate also kills bacteria in your gut. Once you eat glyphosate contaminated food like cow meat that ate grains from corn and all these crops, not the grass-fed cows, they have significant amount of glyphosate. This glyphosate kills a bacteria in your gut that produces tryptophan. That is important as a neurotransmitter precursor. So practically eating industrial-based food and eating glyphosate, when it actually modify your gut microbiome that produces this very important amino acid for your neurotransmitter and protein and peptide synthesis and so on. So after all, it is not only the ketogenic diet, but it has to be natural ketogenic. So in other words, if you go and buy fatty animal products in a department store, it may not be beneficial simply because the cow ate sugar or starch. So as long as it's industry-based or agriculture industry-based food, it's not going to be better, even though it's a ketogenic diet or it has more fat. What you need to do is buy from the biofarm, buy from people who actually grass-fed their animals. So it's not only ketogenic, but it has no glyphosate, and it also has no deuterium.
And
then you have a homework.
Why does one person get it? Because we might have all eaten the same thing, and then some get the disease, and others don't.
Because of your microbiome, because of your gut, because of your, like how much you eat, how much you exercise in the meantime. And besides, what is your biochemical kind of background that can get rid of this heavy isotope of hydrogen, when it gets into the system, how efficient your red blood cells are through glycolysis to get rid of deuterium, because deuterium depletion starts as soon as you swallow food. That's why practically you have to use these bacteria to process food before absorption, because you absorb.
And in this context, context of everything you're telling, where, for example, does a phenomenon like intermittent fasting has a place?
Same here. Intermittent fasting or fasting per se puts you in a ketogenic diet. Actually, sleep. The reason why we sleep is to get into ketosis, so start burning fat. That's why you fall asleep. So even though you get hungry, you're not going to eat because you're sleeping. So then your body can kind of push you into ketosis.
I have to say that I tried this intermittent fasting. I'm now doing it for like 3-4 years, with not too extreme, because I simply noticed that I could often lost in the morning without breakfast. So I thought, okay, if I'm not hungry, why would I eat? And I have, you would think you need food to have energy, but I have more energy by not eating.
Yeah, that's right. Because you are in ketosis. You are born in ketosis. If you measure a baby's, hydroxybutyrate level, they are in ketosis. This is how we are born to this planet, and this is how we wake up every day. And what you do is get the coffee, put some sugar in it, get like a candy bar or one of these Nutri bars or one of cornflakes and that kind of junk, and you kick yourself out of ketosis immediately. So then your body starts fighting this deuterium stuff because your body wants to be breathing. Your body doesn't want this heavy isotope to break down those nanomolecules, your nanomolecules. That's why you wake up every morning in ketosis. Your body is trying to burn fat. That's why in religion, every religion has certain fasting patterns. They actually require you, and what's really interesting is Jews are not allowed to drink while they are fasting. That means they don't even allow to drink water. So their religion really wants to get rid of deuterium.
And Muslims neither during Ramadan.
And Muslims neither.
They cannot drink.
Yeah, you cannot consume anything during the day. And obviously, in the morning and maybe in the evening, you can only eat a certain amount. You cannot really kind of. They have also dietary recommendation on how much and what they can eat. Yes.
Yeah. In contrast to this diet, how do you then explain the popularity and success of vegetarian and vegan diet?
I would. Well, again, I wouldn't say popularity. It's practically what the media kind of pushes. I mean, can I be very honest with you? Eating a vegetarian diet for a human being, we are meat eaters. This is how our gut is assembled. This is how our teeth are arranged. We are like, we can eat everything, but mostly we eat. This is how our gut is assembled. We don't have 50 meters gut like cows do. We don't have 4 stomachs to digest all that stuff. We are not plant eaters. And because of the plant toxins, you have this leaky gut syndrome. Your epithelial cells, your gut lining will be suffering because you eat a plant-based diet. We are not like that. So popularity, I would just replace it with stupidity. That's the easiest way to say it. Why?
Because we would be able to feed all the nation of the earth if everybody wanted to eat. Because it just comes.
Well, it's kind of interesting because you don't have to eat a lot. Okay? The normal feeding habit is not like these days, like you get a bowl of cereal in the morning, cheap stuff, pour like a half bottle of milk on it and just eat it. You have an insulin hike, you have a sugar hike, and in half an hour you're hungry again. Why? Because they swing away. My grandfather, when they went to harvest their crop, which was different than nowadays, they actually only take 2 slices of bread, about 800 grams of pork fat, and about 4 deciliters of water. That was their entire day food. they didn't get hungry. It was enough for them to get through the day. And when they went back home, they pretty much ate the same thing. So it was always a constantly fat and wheat carbohydrates, but because of their exercise pattern, and those carbohydrates were actually sourdough. It was not this junk that they sell in the, like they call it bread, that has nothing to do with bread. Sourdough, that means it's a natural fermentation process. So they actually pre-ferment their food, so they got rid of the deuterium through the yeast and the bacteria that consume them. They just ate the deuterium depleted bread or those products practically. Those are very different nutritional patterns or habits.
So this connects very well what you said, that actually in your previous lecture that bread prepared with this, in French is called levain. I don't know how you call it in English.
Sourdough.
Yes, that bread is healthy. You said it can be integrated into a ketogenic diet, and now I understand why. Because you're saying that bacteria they eat up the deuterium, and then you don't eat it then.
So this is what they did. When I was a kid in Törökszentmiklós, which is 300 years old now, which that's how I started. In Törökszentmiklós in my soul, we actually had bakers. We had ovens, fire ovens that the bakers were making bread. And what they did, they mixed the flour and the water and the eggs into the dough. Or maybe it was just
I think there are no eggs.
no eggs. So it was not the no calorie. It was just the no calorie has eggs. So it was practically flour and water. And what they did, the guy, before they let him sit, punched a big hole in it. So actually he pushed the bacteria from air into the dough. And bacteria that was actually on his hands. And they let it sit for 24 hours. Why? Because as they were making the dough, they mixed it with all kinds of bacteria that's in the air. And that actually soured or broke down all the sugars into lactic acid. That's why it's called sourdough. Because it actually has fermented sugars in it. Those sugars don't have deuterium anymore because the bacteria in the process, they consume up, then they put it in the hot oven, they kill the bacteria, it had a nice crust, and they just ate the bread, which was a little bit sour simply because of the lactic acid content, because of the fermentation.
Excuse me, and that bread did not make people fat. And if we ate that bread in normal quantities, we would not be fat, or we would not have these diseases.
Yeah, again, exactly. And it's two factors. They also had more physical exercise. So they burn, even though they had, there are three kinds of ketosis. There's nutritional, there's metabolic, and there's exercise related. Okay? Nutritional is when you eat fat. It's very easy. Metabolic, when you wake up in the morning and you didn't have food before, so your body is burning fatty acids anyways. And the third one is the exercise ketosis, and that's typically the marathon runner. What do? They train for it, and they actually develop a bacteria in their gut that breaks down lactic acid that is produced in the run, and this bacteria return propionic acid, which is a fatty acid made from lactic acid. But they have to train for this. And they are not as musculous, you know, when you look at a marathon runner, they don't have big muscles. But they use their muscles for 2-3 hours to run. And the reason why they can use those muscles is simply because they develop this bacteria that can actually break down the lactic acid as what is the product of muscle exercise. It breaks down glucose into lactic acid. Lactic acid is either returned to the liver and glucose is regenerated, or it's shipped to the gut, and bacteria will make propionic acid of it, which is a ketogenic. They actually harvest more deuterium from lactic acid, and they return a low deuterium propionic acid that powers these muscle nanometers. And that's why they can run 43 hours, 42 kilometers. Now, if you don't train for it, you just run 42 kilometers, what happens to you? And that's what happened to the Greek guy who was running the marathon. Okay?
Yeah.
If you don't train for it, if you don't have this bacteria, you build up all this lactic acid and you produce sugar from it through your liver metabolism. By the time you make it to the village, just tell them we actually beat the Persians. Actually, you
dropped it.
drop it.
Did he still manage to say it?
What?
Did he manage to actually pass on the message before he died or not?
Actually, he was what? He had time to deliver this. And then he dropped it.
Yeah, I have a question. What would be your recommendation to start such diet for someone who is a sugar addict? Would small steps also count, or you really have to be drastic and?
You need to go first. Just look around the table. There are some vegetables and some fatty stuff. This is what we start eating. Kind of, how can I say? We get a taste for it first, but because not everybody can eat bacon all the time. I can,
but afterwards I need some chocolate.
you need chocolate. That's not very hard. What I can do is, it's really funny. If I feel like it, I get a spoonful of pork fat. I just eat it, put it in my mouth, and I start sipping coffee.
But that's like level 5 for me. What would you suggest for level 1 or 0?
Level 1 or level 0 is just like, you know,
Okay.
a few items from there. Listen, again, you have to go to the store where they have grass-fed animals.
Yeah.
And don't eat a whole lot. Just eat when you're hungry and eat as much as you want. Your body knows it better. Even the doctor tells you drink water. If you're not thirsty, don't drink it.
Yeah.
Why? Because what if the well, here's a couch here. Why don't you lay down and sleep for it? Why you don't? Because you're not sleepy. If I tell you, or if I ask you to drink, you know, a bottle of water, you can actually drink it simply because it's not unpleasant. But if you're not thirsty, there's no need for it. And you can only drink, or you should only drink as much as necessary to kill your thirst. Because water is dangerous because of the deuterium content. It's not by accident that none of those animals that I actually ever really drink water, even if you give it to them. It's not because the circus camel didn't like the water that was given to the circus camel. It's just because they didn't need it. And I actually checked 2 times a day, and I asked the guy who worked there, just like, did you fill up their bucket? No, camel don't drink it. That was the answer. Camels don't drink it. We just have to put it out there.
Yeah.
Because of the animal rights activists. They don't ask the camel. You see, that's the problem. They never talk to the camel. They just sit in an office and they figure like, oh, maybe that's good for the camel. No, not necessarily. and the camel doesn't drink. Even that doesn't matter. You still have to put it out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that my grandma, she's 90 years old. 90, yeah. She was this August, she was 90. And she practically never drinks water. Yeah. She just makes herself tea because she loves tea and that, and not even enough, I would say, during the day. And she really almost never drinks water.
I haven't had water today. I haven't drank water today. I had about 2 deciliters of coffee this morning.
It's logical also because if you go back 100, 200 years ago, people didn't drink water because
it was dangerous.
Yeah.
It could have been, if you look at the Bible, and if you just look at how many, the Bible has 60 books, and it has over 1 million words. It's a big, hefty text of ancient writings. What do you think? How many times actually would anyone in the Bible drink unknown source of water? Zero.
They drink wine, no?
Exactly, and they walk on water.
If they have water, they change it into wine.
Yeah.
So water needs a miracle.
Yeah, if there's water, Jesus made it water. But he also, it's really interesting because Jesus also talked about mitochondria, because he told the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, he told her that you actually produce water. The living water is actually, it's a spring of water in you. And it's like it's a river flow water. So he even named the amount of it, or the volume of it correctly. The ancient writings are very important, but it seems like they knew this knowledge.
They were not running around with their water bottle like everybody else.
Actually, when I was a kid in elementary school, and we were out on a school trip, when we started like, oh, I'm thirsty, teachers behind you are like, you're walking and you're complaining if you're thirsty. And our physical exercise, our teacher who was actually taking us out on these school trips, he was always telling us not to drink water. Just wear your thirst. In 5-10 minutes, if you are still thirsty, if it's not going away, then you take a sip of water. Don't drink too much of it. Because antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is what regulates this whole process. So if you drink too much water, you suppress ADH production, so you cannot really deal with thirst. The Bible is very interesting because in the war of Gilead, who is fighting this 300,000 kind of strong army, he has 30,000 Jews. And so God tells this military leader that you don't need all these Jews. Even though there are 300,000 of your enemy, you don't need all these Jews. Why don't you go down to the river and watch them how they drink? The Jews who actually go on their belly and start drinking water from the river, don't take it. Only take the soldiers that they don't go down to they just actually fight their mouth with water. Because those are the disciplined. Those are the strong ones. Those are the ones that we can. Only 300 of them for that. But they still won the war or the battle. Simply because there's symbolically, there's so many ancient writings about this topic. And this is also part of our the University course, because simply we want to teach the students, the kids, how to kind of historically, from the science history point and from culture and ancient writings, just how to get this information, how to integrate what we know now with ancient writings. So it's all very interesting. Okay.
Very interesting.
Yes, very.
Thank you very much. We can continue while eating.
Yeah, while you guys are eating, we just but we'll ask
We say goodbye to Ashley.
Yeah. We say goodbye to our
Yes. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.